business at the front of this meeting. So welcome to the Great Education Colorado November 14th, 2023 Advocates Network. We are one week removed. I'm not inserting units apparently, removed from the election, and we have a lot to talk about. All right, so in the chat, please put your name, personal pronouns, what city you're zooming in from in your organization or school. You can see me as an example on the bottom of the screen there. Ben Robinson, he, him, Denver, Great Education, Colorado. All right, GEC's vision, or updated vision, through public education, every Colorado, sorry, my thing was in the way, student, regardless of their zip code, learning needs, language, identities, or the color of their skin, graduates prepared to lead their best life. And then GEC's mission. Great Education Colorado harnesses the power of grassroots activism and diverse, inclusive networks to guarantee that public schools in every Colorado community are welcoming and adequately, equitably, and sustainably funded. Our goal, as always, for the Advocates Network is to create a space for us to build community and take action together. Our next Advocates Network is on December 12th. I'll drop that link in the chat when I am not sharing my screen, and it's not a whole ordeal here. All right, and then to finish us off, we have our community commitments. The first one, as always, is move up, move back. Everyone here has a lot of great things to say, and because everyone here has a lot of great things to say, we can't have one or two people monopolizing the conversation here, asking too many questions, etc. So, be mindful of what you're saying, what you're asking, and then step back and let others participate. Number two, no one knows everything, but together we know a lot. Let's learn together. We all come from different backgrounds here, whether we are teachers, whether we're political consultants, whether we are just former students, and that is our involvement in education. We have different perspectives on education, and they are valuable, and we want you to share them here. And last but not least, presuming positive intent, but acknowledging our impact. Right? So if somebody says something hurtful, if somebody says something that ticks another person off, or that they really just don't believe, our expectation here is that we mend that quickly and then get on with our business and enjoy the rest of this great hour. So to open things up today, I want to introduce perhaps a familiar face to a lot of you here, and that is Tracy Rainey. She's the executive director at the Colorado School Finance Project, which is your source for pretty much every important piece of data related to education policy. They do it all, and Tracy is here today to talk to us about some important things going into the legislative session. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Tracy Rainey.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks for having me here. I'm going to let Ben run the slides. And we're going to talk about the governor's budget. The budget comes out November 1. And that budget then kind of sets the tone for what you're going to see in part of the discussion as they think about the budget, not just for K-12, but for all parts of state government. And so one of the things that we began to hear is that we're going to pay off the budget stabilization factor, which is great. But then the terminology around that is that we are full funding education. And that's where I want to take a minute and step back to, because fully funding education and paying off the budget stabilization factor are two very different things. The goal of Amendment 23, which is how they reduce the budget for making the reductions in K-12 funding, was to bring us back up to 1988-89 funding levels after adjusted for inflation. And so as we now talk about it, that still is the benchmark that we're at. And that was before standards and assessments and accountability and accreditation. So it's really important to think about what that means relative to what districts need to operate. And so when we think about the fact that we can't pay our teachers, we can't offer certain programs, that is not going to mean that now, because we don't have a budget stabilization factor, that all those problems are solved. The next slide, please. So one of the other things that is going to be happening this week, Friday, will be a special legislative session, and that's to deal with property taxes. And the importance of being able to have that conversation is, one, because HH failed, and two, because we are looking at a large increase in property valuation. And there is always a confusion that that means that schools are going to get more money. And it does mean that more dollars are available for local governments, but it doesn't mean that K-12 is necessarily going to have more money because of the formula that's in place. But what will be important in watching this special session is seeing how they solve for that and making sure that when they're considering solutions, that they are thinking about providing some type of property tax relief that is not going to take money away from K-12 funding. And so one of the important things that we are going to be watching is what is that mechanism that they're going to be using then in order to backfill K-12. And if you remember in HH, it was creating a new revenue stream. But now there's no new revenue stream to work with. And so it'll be important to see, does that money come from the general fund, the state education fund? What is their solution? There's also going to be a conversation around relief for renters and a relief for other local governments who are going to be losing revenue as well. So all of these conversations are going to happen fairly quickly, because county assessors need to have this resolved so that they can begin to make the changes that are necessary and still meet the timelines that are put in place in order for districts to certify their mill levies by the end of this year. So the next slide, please. So the other item that is brewing greatly here, and Lisa sits on this task force, is the school finance task force, which they had their 6th meeting today. And the purpose of this task force is to do 2 things in particular. One, to create the parameters for an adequacy study, and 2, to make recommended changes to certain parts of the formula, whether that's around student characteristics or district characteristics. And the task force has 2 more meetings, and they are then to make these recommendations prior to the adequacy work being done. And the adequacy work won't be completed until January of 2025. So the order of operations here is a little out of sync of how normally you would think to do this, because you would want the information from the adequacy or costing out work before you would have decisions being made to change the formula. So as for the timeline, they're doing a lot of work in a very short period of time, like we said, and at the same time trying to make progress based upon the goals of what the legislation asks for. I think there's been a lot of struggle in this committee because of how quickly they are being asked to make decisions, and everybody is coming into this in a very different knowledge base. There are 17 members on this task force, of which some have been involved in policy conversations. There are some practitioners, but the majority of people on the task force really do not have the hands-on experience of working in a district or working in the broader scope of policy, or have been involved in costing out or adequacy studies before. And, as for an update in today's meeting, I would say there was not as much agreement on things as they were hoping. And I think that the more that people are being pushed into making a decision, they're actually pushing people away from making decisions. And so how that gets interpreted by the facilitator is going to be very interesting because he is very driven on making sure that there is a work plan and that work plan is met and that time frame is met. And so when they come back with modeling and various scenarios, I'm not sure how that's going to reflect the actual committee and if they feel like it's captured all the different concerns that have been brought up. It'd probably be good to get Lisa's opinion on that as well.
Yeah, it is an amazing amount of information being thrown at us, and we're looking at this data and saying, do you think we should do a cost of living adjustment, or should it be something else? What should the percent be? Where in the formula should it be? What about the size factor? Should there be a remoteness factor and a sparsity factor? If so, how much? And my reaction to all of this is we're doing an adequacy study. And that is a big dang deal that the legislature passed, commissioning a study to actually, as Tracy said, find out how much it actually does cost to meet the standards for every student in every district, regardless of its characteristics, regardless of the student's characteristics, to make sure everybody succeeds. That's why we're doing the study. And so it really does feel cart before the horse. And the other cart that is coming before the horse is that we don't have an understanding of what we should be doing about how much money, how big is the pie that we're dividing. And I think that is going to be the really interesting when we have to make decisions. We have 2 more meetings, as Tracy said. How do you deal with the big the elephant in the room, so to speak, that the people who want to make this policy are not the people who can fund the policy? And that's going to be an interesting conversation. The good news is, however, I think that everybody on this committee, no matter who appointed them, there were Democrats, Republicans who appointed folks to this task force, everybody is really understanding that there needs to be more money. And if we can make a recommendation as a committee, I think that will be helpful in fighting this fight that we seem to have, where we first have to convince people that the BS, getting rid of the BS factor, is not fully funding schools.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Tracy. And I believe Tracy has a few more minutes here. We're at 4:45 now. Is it all right if we open it to some questions, Tracy?
Yes, that's just fine.
Great. I'm going to stop the screen share then. Great. Questions, comments? We've got the task force, we've got the governor's budget. Why am I not remembering the other thing?
Session.
Special session.
Special session.
A special session.
I wanted to clarify what Lisa just said. What I wrote down that it seems to be that the task force members, there's some amount of consensus that more money is needed.
Yeah, so the inch deep, as Tracy said, people are coming to this conversation with very different levels of understanding of school finance. Everybody came to the conclusion that we need to basically double the amount that we spend on at-risk students, and 50 to 75% more for English language learning, and significantly more for special needs. But there was this assumption based on conversations that go back virtually a decade about how you just need to take it from the cost of living. Like there's this chunk of money, there's this cost of living factor that's worth how many? $1 billion? Is that about right?
It's about $1.5 billion.
So $1.5 billion that it's like, there's just this money that we can take money from there and put it into at risk and ELL. But when you take that $1.5 billion, you are taking away a $1.5 billion that is spread through every different district. And so this idea that there's this free money, I think that piece of information, so we started off with, yes, we obviously need to spend more on at-risk students. And there is this understanding coming now that we've studied the cost of living that you can't just take it from one part of the formula and put it in another and say, now we're fully, that now we're going to take care of kids with special needs or who are at risk. And so that's why I think like learning together and having people get past the slogans of the cost of living is just a ridiculous thing and it's not equitable. You get a little bit deeper and they realize it's not that simple. Is that fair, Tracy?
Yeah, and I think the other thing that they realize is that there is a difference between cost of living, cost of doing business, and a wage index, and that all of those are important components for districts in order to be able to operate, and especially given the fact that we have such low salaries compared to across the country, and looking at the fact that we have trouble recruiting and retaining teachers. So I think that broader knowledge base has been accepted. Now, what they want to do about it and how they want to solve for it, I do think is looks different.
Yeah. But we're getting down to more granular concepts like, yes, you need in a district that has very high cost of living, one of our resort communities, for instance, you need to pay teachers more so that they can live anywhere near where they teach. But if you are a remote district way off near Kansas, you need to pay teachers more to retain them because there aren't the kinds of what is the phrase they use, the just sort of living
yeah, I mean, you're not living in an environment that is attracting people to move there, so you're trying to compensate for it from paying. The other thing that is a real challenge is that if you are bordering another state, it might be more advantageous for you to drive an extra 30 minutes and make another $20,000 more a year and cross state lines. And so you don't capture that in a cost of living or a cost of doing business. You really only capture that in a wage index.
Thank you for your question,
Oh,
Christy.
sorry.
I'm going to call on Duran.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say it really sounds like to me, and my grandmother used to say it very well. It sounds like robbing Peter to pay Paul to do what it is we need to do instead of balancing things out and understanding with systems of schooling what needs to happen is if the money is there, which my understanding is that the money is there. So if the money is there, why don't we distribute it correctly and equally so folks can get what they need? I mean, I understand that HH didn't pass, and that can have and will have a significant effect on things. But at the same time, we've got to stop taking from one to compensate the other. There has to be a balance there.
Absolutely, and there needs to be a bigger pie. I mean, just for an example, and this is, I'm sure this makes Tracy's hair stand on end because I'm so oversimplifying the School Finance Act, but you could have a district that is getting $2 million from the cost of living factor and $200,000 from the at-risk factor. And if you take $1 million from the cost of living factor and put it into the at-risk factor, you haven't done anything. You can pat yourself on the back and say, this may look like we're being more equitable, but in fact, the amount of money that changes is insignificant. And what we need to be doing is saying, first of all, we need an adequate base, because the base that we have is based just on historical, not what it actually takes to meet the needs of a student without special needs in a district that has no special characteristic. That's what a base is supposed to be, is like, if you have a student in a district that's, you know, not rural, it has economies of scale, how much would it cost? We're $2,000 behind that amount. And so that's another thing about talking about how do we put this through a formula. The number that we're putting through the formula is just way too small. So Ronnie, to your point, we need to distribute more equitably. But if we don't have a more adequate pie,
but see, why, that's the thing. Why do we keep using a pie?
Okay.
And I say that based on the fact that, you know, in terms of my kids and them being educated and stuff, there was never enough pie for them to be educated adequately. So my husband and I had to do more. And I mean more in terms of being present, showing up, and all of those things. So I'm wondering, why is there always this pie and people are always fighting for their slice of pie instead of creating something or looking at something that has a broader spectrum and you showing love to everybody, as opposed to, okay, we'll give you a little bitty sliver here, we'll give you a little bitty sliver here. And, you know, the things that look the most appealing to us, we're going to give them a bigger piece of the pie. And, you know, I mean, it's just a recipe really for disaster.
I agree. And it has been. Go ahead, Sean.
Sharon, my situation was similar. My kids are older now, but my wife and I at the time had to work harder, do a lot of extra things, and show up at, you know, PTA events and raise money in order to kind of subsidize what the school needed. But not every parent has that ability, and not every parent has that time to commit, right? Not every parental unit or family member. So it's so frustrating, and I totally understand what you're saying.
And I would also add just a sort of sideline plug for the Every Student Welcome Network that we're getting started, that it's not enough just to make sure. We need to expand the pie. We need to make sure, we need to increase the amount of money that we are spending on our schools and our students to reflect the much greater need than is being addressed by what we spend now. And we need to distribute it in a more equitable way that recognizes at risk and the different kind of characteristics that even 2 or 3, you know, rural districts have very different needs as well. But the Every Student Welcome Network is taking that next step, which is saying locally, how do we help school boards and school districts spend those dollars in ways that are really meaningful to the students that we're most trying to help? And that has to happen locally. And that's one of the things that we're trying to do, is take folks who have been working in silos, who have been fighting for equitable education in their communities, who have been working on these issues, working on school board elections, et cetera, separately, and bringing everybody together and saying, how do we do this together? How do we prepare so that when there's more dollars available, we are going to be spending them in ways that are really meaningful to local communities and the communities who have been least close to power traditionally.
So isn't the elephant in the room Tabor? And that is the reason we don't have a bigger pie, because people continue to vote against giving up their share.
Yes, Sue, are you going to say something? I don't want to. That might have been just an agreement. I think that that's another plug for the Every Student Welcome Network. We have got to change the narrative. The Republicans are well funded, they're well coordinated, and right now what they're saying is that the voters said, don't take my surplus checks, we love Tabor. That is not what they said. There was a lot of misinformation. There were people on our side who were thinking, I'm not going to vote for a tax cut. What, are you crazy? So we need to be able to tell a story, because they've got money behind their story, that everybody loves their Tabor rebates, and you can't touch them. That's what they'll be saying during this session, special session.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Sally. Are there any more questions before we move on to our next part of the agenda? All right. Well, thank you so much, Tracy, for doing this, and as always, sharing your knowledge about school finance. And best of luck at your next talk, which I think is right after this. Is that correct?
Yep, I'm doing a class at CU Denver tonight.
Great.
So
Well, have fun,
thanks
Tracy.
for having me.
Thanks so much. All right, great. We're going to go ahead and go back to our slides. We're going to talk about the thing that is probably near the top, or at the top of a lot of people's minds, which is the 2023 election. What happened and what does it mean for Colorado? All right, so our two ballot initiatives, obviously, were Prop HH and Prop II. Already talked a little bit about Prop II tonight, or HH tonight. We're going to talk about it a little bit more here in a second. But let's start off with the good news. Prop II passed very convincingly. You can see the yes vote was 67.5% and the no vote was 32.5%. And what else is pretty cool is it passed overwhelmingly in many conservative strongholds, many conservative counties around the state. If you look at the map, it looks like almost the inverse of what happened with HH. So we're going to go ahead here, and then Prop HH passed, or did not pass, rather. We got yes was 40.7% and no 59.3%. So pretty overwhelming defeat. We had majority vote in just 6 counties in Colorado, which is obviously not what we were hoping to see. But we have already mentioned some of the drawbacks of HH, including how complex it is and how easy it was for the other side to spin that really disingenuous narrative about what HH would do. But let's go to our lessons learned, and Lisa, I would love for you to chime in here from Prop II. And one of the big ones is if it's not associated with Tabor, so if Tabor is not in the name, if they can't connect it to Tabor, if it has nothing to do with Tabor, then we're fine reallocating revenue. You're right, we're not borrowing from the cap, and people seem to be okay with that. No organized opposition to speak of for this, but there also wasn't really a yes campaign at all, which was an interesting scenario. And it was clear by the ballot language that that revenue had already been raised, which I think probably played a significant role in the fact that it passed so convincingly. Lisa, do you want to add anything here?
It just confirms that if you want to win on a fiscal matter, go to a sin tax. This one was, it was virtually impossible to defend a no position, which is, no, we should take this $23 million and instead of giving it to kids, we should give it to tobacco wholesalers. So, yeah, if it's, it's easier to win something without opposition, and
Yeah.
I don't know how much we can learn from it, other than there are some throwaway things that we're going to be able to clean up once in a while.
Yeah, and that this is not the kind of measure we ever want to have to vote yes on because of the Tabor cap. This is a factor of the fiscal bind that we've been in for 30 years in this state. I would not exist without it. So, and you wouldn't have either, but they do. All right, HH, Lisa, I think we can probably talk a lot more about this one. Polis admitted as much, I believe it was in the Denver Post, that like complex measures like H can cause confusion, and they're really, really hard to market to voters. And that an early well-funded yes campaign is key. We did not have that. The messaging was not there. The money for a well-funded yes campaign was not there. And it started really, really late. Too late, probably, even if it had been well-funded, to make much of a difference. So those are some pretty big takeaways. We've known some of those already, but this was another thing that unfortunately drove them home. Lisa?
There was a well-funded early no campaign that started about 30 years ago, and that's where the opposition has us. We should have a yes campaign for whatever is going to be next. They have a no campaign for whatever we come up with next, and we need to have a yes campaign for whatever is going to happen in the future, and that makes it more likely that things will be put on if there is that infrastructure. Have I mentioned the Every Student Welcome Network yet?
We also have that later, Lisa.
Yeah, I know. That was sort of a joke. And here's the other thing, and as I hope we can start. There's been so much polling done on language around taxes, and it's really, really difficult. But I wonder about this message. The reason it was complex is because it was responsible. If you have with the exception of Initiative 63, which was really pretty simple, and I wish had gotten on the ballot last year, fiscal policy is really complex. So we want to give property tax relief, but you can't do that without hurting local districts. And it's going to hurt some local districts worse than others. If you cut the residential assessment rate for a district that had no property valuation add, there's some districts in Colorado, some cities, some counties where the property values haven't gone up 40%. You can't treat the entire state the same way. And if you're trying to say we want to help make housing more affordable, then what are we doing for renters? So that's what that complexity, like if you want to do good policy, it needs to be complex. And if you do complex policy, it's not going to pass. Somehow we need to, getting back to you, Sally, somehow maybe there's this way to tell people, aren't you sick of this? They keep coming to you over and over. And, maybe we should make legislators do their job, because that's the difficulty here is that good policy is complex, and complex policy loses.
And we have certainly seen that in the past with complex policy. But yeah, I think those are great lessons learned. And really, we don't have, I think, much more to reflect on other than that really with HH, we know what we did wrong. And with II, it was uncontroversial. So really pretty simple.
Sadly,
right.
The HH lessons are very much like the CC lessons from 4 years ago, and yet we made the same mistakes. The same mistakes were made. I will use the passive voice because it wasn't us who decided.
Great. So on to the other big item in this 2023 election, which was school board races all over the state. We had a few surprises, some not so surprising things, but we did gain on a few important boards that we've been monitoring. Unfortunately, Woodland Park, kind of the boogeyman of all bad boards, retained their hold, and El Paso County as well saw either retention, and I believe in one of the places they actually added a couple, one or two of the places. But I will go ahead. Lisa is much more well-versed in school boards than I am, and in the potential consequences. So I will turn it over to her to continue the synopsis.
I could go over the big stuff, but I'd also like to give folks on the call the opportunity to just talk about your own district and what you saw and how much grassroots organizing made a difference.
Would you like to do that before the synopsis or after?
Okay, I can do the big picture.
Yeah, let's do the big picture, and then I will go ahead and, yeah.
We were looking at I-70 corridor, basically. I'm not sorry, I-25 corridor for the biggest district, and looking at both the districts where they were trying to take control and where they were just trying to add one person so that 2 years from now they could take control. And the I-25 district north of El Paso did pretty well. So the majorities of pro-public education, pro-equity candidates prevailed in Poudre, Greeley, Thompson, Adams 12, Brighton, Littleton, they were trying to pick up a seat and they didn't. Jeffco, they were trying to pick up a seat and they didn't. Douglas maintained the three, it's a 4-3 majority of anti-public education folks, but the three pro-public education folks swept, so that next 2 years from now, only need to win 1 out of 4 in order to have the majority of pro-education folks. El Paso District 11, which is Colorado Springs, 49, which is Falcon, 20, which is Academy, Pueblo, both the city and the surrounding rural county, all were taken over. Gunnison prevented, they swept. They're good guys. I'm not remembering all the other ones, but that's the statewide, and then Denver for Great Ed, we just stayed out of it. We didn't endorse anybody, but we're really trying to be supportive of the district where the bad guys wanted to ban books. And it's just this whole other set of criteria in DPS, but yeah, Jerry heard. So experiences elsewhere. I can't even remember what happened in Boulder, Jerry.
Boulder did okay. All the endorsed candidates from the EA won, and won really well. So we're kind of happy in Boulder. But so far, the far right has stayed away from us. I think they know better. They're looking, like you said, from the spring south. But I will say, because I've been down in Canyon City schools, they were very nervous down there with a potential takeover. That did not happen, which was really nice.
Right. Kathy?
I'm in Loveland, and we had an excellent, yes. We have one seat that I think is still being contested. It was close, but I think the incumbent, who is the conservative, the odds are she'll stay. It would be wonderful if she didn't, but anyway, we still have a great majority on our school board. I want to say that the questions that you posed, we asked some of those questions during the league's candidate forum, and also with some of the smaller forums that were happening, and they were very effective for being able to discern, I think, who wanted vouchers, who wanted to ban books, who wanted parental control over everything, and that was nice. It was nice to have those questions because a lot of times I think they know how to dance around the questions being asked, and those help. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Great to hear.
Yeah, it's good to hear our stuff being put into action. That's awesome. Thank you, Kathy.
I have a few to add. And I'm just going down my list, so I may have more to tell you later, but we had good results in Brighton, Cherry Creek, Dolores, Durango,
Creek, right?
and Eagle County. And that I'm going down alphabetically, so I'll tell you more in a minute.
Douglas
comment?
as well. Douglas,
I feel
Gunnison,
I have to. Sorry, Christy, go ahead.
Gunnison was hit hard with a lot of, it was a very targeted attempt to take over, and our candidates won by double the votes. I mean, they soundly beat all three. We still have one conservative person that got on last 2 years ago. So, but otherwise we're all good. But it was quite a community effort. And those questions helped because they really tried, their verbiage was hard to discern.
I want to go back to Evie if you have any more.
Yeah, I'm still looking through my list, but Roaring Fork was good. And I think I skipped one, so come back to me again in a minute.
Great, thank you, Evie. Other experiences or questions?
Yeah, this is Jan in Colorado Springs.
I'm gonna call on you.
We were absolutely blown away. Our ground game we thought was really on. We had a lot of volunteers. We knocked a lot of doors. We called a lot of people and texted a lot of people. We weren't convinced we were going to get all 4 of our, candidates in, but none of them got in, and we were absolutely blown away. It means for District 11 and 20, it's going to be 4 years of being in the minority. And it's just really horrible because we don't know what's going to happen, what their agenda is going to be. I'm going to put something in the chat for a Colorado Times recorder talking about Leadership Institute training that happened, which is craziness. If you haven't read it, you need to look at it. So they're not sworn in yet. We don't know what's going to happen. I think they're gunning for the Teachers Association. So that's what we're going to try to combat.
So I think one good person won in Mesa County.
Yep.
But did you already talk about Woodland Park? Yeah, it started off looking like it was going to be good, but then it turned out bad. Am I right?
Yeah, I think it looked quite favorable at first, and then it just turned. So
I think one good person knocked out the president, right? Illingsworth got knocked out, and then 2 of the not good people won the other 2 spots.
gotcha.
And the other
Sorry,
Garfield County race, I don't think it went well.
Rifle, I think you're right. Garfield,
Garfield too. It was kind of hard to tell, but I don't think the people we wanted won. I'll have to go back and check.
Jerry?
You briefly mentioned DPS, and I'm very concerned about what happened at DPS because of the dark money that fed into that campaign, that outspent our side. Oh my God, I think it's 3 or 4 times, with no accountability as to where the money came from because it's dark money. And well, I don't know if they're totally associated with some of the Moms for Freedom or anything. They are in favor of sort of abolishing the system. And I don't know if this is setting an example of what could happen in other districts.
Duran?
The name of that group is Moms for Liberty, and there was one individual, his name was, I can't remember what his last name was, but I know his first name was Daniel. And I know a lot of the literature that was sent out to our home was in opposition of HH. But yeah, and it was just really weird how the mail outs just kept coming and everything. But it was, it was really strange because, I mean, even the school board members that got elected, it was a strange thing. It really was. It wasn't anything that came through to benefit the whole. And right now, as we speak, there's a campaign, a fringe group of folks that are trying to get the other parts of the board that were duly elected, trying to get a recall vote to get rid of them. And if that happens, that means that, because currently on the board, with the way it looks with the new people coming in, there's one Black person, and that's Michelle Quattlebaum. If they're successful in getting this recall to go through, there will probably be no people of color on the Denver School Board.
And when did the recall effort start? Do you know?
It started probably what's today, the 14th. It probably started the day after the election.
Okay.
To be quite honest with you, because I got little fringe emails here and there, and because I've been kicked off a lot of Facebook pages.
Probably for great reasons.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, but absolutely, and that's what I think in this group, being that we're about networking and bringing people together, that's what we need to be extremely mindful of, is the fact that, there are those entities out there that are fighting to get groups similar to Moms of Liberty in and things of that nature without taking any consideration or listening to other voices that are in the room. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's been with Moms for Liberty, and then a lot of these other national groups that have, I mean, they have national concerns, and they're coming into school districts and trying to, upend everything, I think, to put it lightly. So I think as we continue on this year, we're going to need to, form some kind of resistance to that. And actually, Lisa's going to talk about something in just a few minutes that will help us do that. But Sally, I saw you had your hand up, so I want to give you some space here.
I can't figure out how to do it.
And then and just 1 second, we'll have one more person after Sally, and then we'll get back to our agenda and finish things up.
Okay, I'll try to be quick. The Denver situation, I think, is different than the other Moms for Liberty stuff. It's the education reformers, the charter school backers, the Reed Hastings, the John Arnold, is that his name? Who want to charterize schools. They are not teacher friendly, teacher union friendly.
Privatizing education.
Correct. And I mean, they would not get anywhere in Denver, I don't think, with trying to ban books and blah, 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 because, Denver is a sea of liberalism and the ocean of conservatism, as my husband used to say. But ultimately, I see it ending up the same place, that it's gonna destroy public education. And, so that's where I see
it's gonna be a
Denver.
bumpy ride.
Yep.
Thank you, Sally. And good point that there's more than one way to mess things up. So
Indeed. Yeah.
Always is, but I think we forget it sometimes because we get so fixated on the right that we forget that a lot of people who vote pretty much like we do harbor very different beliefs about what schools should be, how they should be funded, and what the trajectory of districts should look like. All right. Is there one last question before we move on to the last couple slides in our agenda? Or comment, whatever. Cool. We'll go ahead and just kick it back to our slide deck here. Whoops, that's not the slide deck. All right, Lisa, I'm going to hand it over to you for something that you have talked about a little bit, but want to talk about more. So let's get it going. Lisa?
Sorry about that. I want to leave time for people to ask any questions about this because I have brought it up a number of times, but kind of thinking about what would it have been good to have in 2022 and 2023? What is the movement? What is the network? What is the coalition? What did we need to be able to get Initiative 63 on the ballot, even if the powers that be didn't want to give us money? That would have been able to have the school board candidates in place and trained about fundraising and messaging well in advance. What could we have done if we were working statewide, learning from each other, mentoring each other? And that's what I think we needed a week ago and 2 years ago to get ready for a week ago is what we're trying to create now. We've got to bring everybody together, people who are working their hearts out for public education, whether it's fighting privatization or it's fighting book banning and hatred and bias directed at kids of color and LGBTQ. We need to pull all of those folks together who are working on all those things and come together as a network of networks so that we know what each other are doing. We can help each other. We don't have to keep recreating wheels, and we can have a place where that narrative can start bubbling up from the bottom, from the grassroots. That's what we're trying to do. It's a long-term vision, but it starts with just individuals saying, I'm going to be part of the Every Student Welcome Pledge, which is just saying, I will do what I can in my power to make sure that every student has a place where they feel safe, seen, supported. So it's a really low intro ask, but many of you are connected to organizations, so think about that. But and we're starting to get that work done for what it's going to look like. So if you didn't get an email, it means you haven't taken the pledge. We hope you will, and you'll share it with others. And the
I'll go
next
ahead and put it in
thing,
the chat in just a few minutes, or just a couple minutes. I'm gonna let Lisa explain this now.
the next part is there is a special session starting on Friday. There will be so much stuff happening so fast and so many different bills that will come and go, and who knows what's going to get negotiated at the end. But we do have an action that we'd like, we hope that you will do. You'll post on social media, you'll send it to others, which gives you the opportunity. And I don't know if we can we pull it up, Ben, so people can see?
Yeah, just the screen, like the web page.
And even you can show people, if you go to the Great Ed website, you can show people where to find it.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna put it in the chat too. So
okay. But what we're saying is, whatever we know that the John Calderas of the world want to cut property taxes and do it irresponsibly and not backfill schools and other local governments. For us, we're talking about the schools because that's who we are. So we are asking people to write their legislators before the session starts to sign on to these values, which if you've clicked on it, you can see what we're asking for is this last statement, I will not support a property tax cut package unless it responsibly and sustainably backfills the loss of local school revenue. And there's two parts. Responsible means don't leave the schools behind by giving property tax relief. You've got to backfill the property, the revenues that are lost by however they cut the property taxes. And secondly, there are some who want to take it out of the reserve. That's one-time dollars. And whenever you use one-time dollars for an ongoing expense like funding our schools, it just leaves a bigger hole. So that reserve is there so that if there is a downturn, we're not going to explode the BS factor. We'll have a little bit of time to stay afloat. So yeah, please personalize it in some way to make sure that that your view gets across. But I don't think there's a lot of folks who are mobilizing grassroots because there just wasn't a lot of time. So this is one way to do it. If you have been on a Facebook group that's been fighting for your district and the school board, please post it there and let folks know this is all about every student welcome. Part of it's about funding. It's also about fighting privatization. It's about fighting book banners. It's all one thing. We are protecting and promoting public education. So that is an action that's very easy, and we hope you'll share. Would love to hear your comments about either of those things. That is every student welcome and this action.
Well, one of the lessons I've learned is not to assume that just because my legislator is very friendly to public education, that she fully understands this stuff. And it is important to communicate the message. You know, I have made assumptions in the past and learned the hard way that I couldn't count on them because they really weren't that well informed on the specifics. So I'm going to actually do this, even though I normally wouldn't.
Thank you, Evie. That's a really good point. And it means that they've just got something from another perspective that's making them look at an issue maybe a little bit differently, especially if it's coming from you.
Great. Thank you, Evie. I think that's a great point. We are 1 minute from done here. So I just want to thank you all for coming out this evening. Great discussion as always. We will hang on for just a couple minutes afterwards. But yeah, thanks everybody. And looks like we have a lot to work on this upcoming legislative session.
Thanks all.